The new rule is just a sentence long.
But some worry it could have sweeping consequences this fall in a critical swing state.
I tell you, this petition, I think it won the prize for the most emails. Am I correct?
That petition, approved by the Georgia State Election Board this week, may empower local election board members to delay certifying election results or toss them out entirely.
And this change is happening with Election Day, less than 3 months away.
I want to make it clear for the record that this board is determining that 90 days before the election is not too late to be making changes to our election rules and procedures.
I think by supporting this rule, what we're saying is that we stand with those who have to sign legal documents stating that their information is accurate.
But the interruptions could have ripple effects.
The thing to remember is that these attacks really do still cause harm because they do create confusion and they threaten to disrupt the entire election process.
The vote on the rule came 3 days after former President Donald Trump praised the board's Republican members at a campaign rally in Atlanta.
Janice Johnson, Rick Jeffries, and Janelle King, 3 people, are all pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. They're fighting.
On today's episode, how the work of an obscure state board could shape the 2024 election.
And later, we'll look at how Trump has reignited his feud with Georgia Governor Brian Kemp.
Because he's a bad guy, he's a disloyal guy, and he's a very average governor. Little Brian Kemp. Bad guy.
I'm WABE Politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE Politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast.
Welcome to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. Sam, let's dig into this new rule approved by the State Election Board. What would it do?
As we mentioned, this rule, it's a short one, and on its face, it seems pretty anodyne. The rule empowers local boards to conduct, quote, reasonable inquiry before certifying election results. But, that language, it's pretty vague, and opponents, like the board's lone Democrat, Sarah Tindall Gazelle, fear that could create chaos if a local board member, say, citing unfounded election fraud claims, refuses to certify, either because they say they couldn't conduct that reasonable inquiry or because they said it turned up problems.
So, Sam, how are Republicans who backed the rule defending it?
Well, they're insisting that if local election board members are being asked to sign off on the accuracy of election results, well, they should be given the tools to verify that. This all started when some GOP local election board members, including in Fulton County, voted against certifying primary results this spring, though they were outnumbered and the certification was still approved. This week, though, we heard this debate playing out in the clip you heard at the beginning of the show, in a back and forth between Gazelle and Republican board member Janelle King. But Gazelle emphasizes that Georgia election law has not given local election boards the discretion to vote against certifying the results. Challenges, she said, should be handled in the courts, and that happens after certification.
So, Sam, what are the consequences of this rule?
I put that question to Lauren Miller Karalunas, a counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice who has studied certification extensively.
For as long as we've held elections in this country, local certifying officials have tried to manipulate and interfere with the process to benefit their political agendas. And that's because it's one of the last stops on the way to finalizing an election.
But in modern times, this has been cropping up more regularly since the 2020 election. You might remember, Rahul, Republicans on the Wayne County Board of Supervisors in Michigan initially blocked certifying the results in that state's largest county, which includes Detroit. And this has also happened more recently in other swing states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada. Though in all of these cases, the efforts, they were not successful because state officials and the courts had mechanisms to intervene.
So, Sam, I asked Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger about this at Wednesday's Georgia Chamber event in Athens. Here are some of his thoughts on the new election rule.
Well, I just know that by 5 p.m. on November 12th, the county needs to certify the election.
Any concerns that this could cause delays? Do you think everybody will, in the end, make it to that deadline?
I don't predict the future. I just know when people have deadlines, so they have to meet state law. So people's job is to follow the law and follow the Constitution.
But still, Kara Lunas at the Brennan Center says these efforts can still cause harm, especially in a presidential election year when you're also running up against the deadline for the Electoral College.
So disrupting certification by even just a few days can make it really challenging for state election officials. And they also have to divert really scarce resources to figuring out these issues at a time when they're already overburdened and trying to administer a presidential election.
And then there's also this.
What's so worrisome about that is even if these refusals aren't successful, each time someone refuses to certify or disrupt certification, it increases distrust in our election system at a time when false information is already causing dangerous harm and fueling things like threats and harassment and intimidation against election officials.
So clearly, the stakes are high here. I want to talk about the people making this policy. What is the job of the state election board, and who decides who sits on it?
The state election board is charged with implementing Georgia election law as passed by the legislature. So they adjudicate election cases and pass rules to help execute statutes in Georgia election law. The board has a nonpartisan chair who's appointed by the governor, a member each appointed by the House Speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Georgia GOP, so 3 Republicans, and 1 member appointed by the Democratic Party of Georgia. So Rahul, Republicans, they control the board and can vote as a bloc to approve whatever they want. And in recent years, even as the partisan breakdown of the board has remained unchanged, the board's approach has been shifting. Until recently, there were Republican members on the board who would block efforts by the wing of the party focused on touting false election fraud claims. And those people, though, have largely been replaced by members of that election integrity movement, or at least people who are willing to indulge these activists and pass rules that follow their preferences.
So, Sam, I covered President Trump's rally in Atlanta last weekend, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. You know what jumped out at me? Is to hear the former president praise Georgia state election board members by name. He even picked one out and had her stand up and be applauded by the crowd. Can you put all of that in context?
It's really unusual, right? In normal times, most people would not even know the names of these board members. But at this rally, we heard Trump call them out by name, calling them, as we heard at the beginning of the show, pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. One of the members, Janice Johnston, was actually in the audience, as you mentioned. And GOP member Janelle King, another one of these members, was asked this week at the election board meeting by reporters whether all of this creates a conflict that prevents the board from carrying out their duties.
I don't make decisions based on which side of the aisle wants me to do something. I look at the facts, I look at the evidence, I look at what's in front of me, and I see this is a good rule. Is this going to continue to secure our elections or not?
Rahul, I asked Democratic member Sarah Tyndall Gazelle about all of this, the Trump shoutouts, the rightward tilt of the board, and she said she's served on this panel for several years, and it wasn't always like this.
All of our decision-making was driven by our interpretation and application of the law, which is not always going to be the same. Lawyers disagree all the time. Slowly but surely, the makeup has changed.
Now, she says many of the members are non-experts whose experiences with elections began really in 2020 and who are making decisions based on preferred outcomes, not by interpreting the letter of the law.
When you have partisans openly crowing that their appointees are going to lead to their victory, that undermines public confidence. And it really calls into question our ability to make sure that all of the counties are adhering to election laws.
So let's take a break here. This is Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. Welcome back to Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast.
So, Rahul, let's get back to that Trump rally in Atlanta. It's the same venue as the one where we both covered Vice President Kamala Harris just a few days before. I want to focus on the return of this feud between Trump and Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp, which had cooled but seems to have really boiled over again this week.
Sam, let me tell you, getting to Georgia State University's Convocation Center early Saturday morning. This was not the story I was expecting to do. During the rally, we saw Trump take a shot at Governor Kemp, Georgia First Lady Marty Kemp, and Secretary of State Raffensperger on social media over a couple of things, including making sure this election is, quote, not stolen. Governor Kemp fired back on social media saying his focus is winning in November and, quote, leave my family out of it. By the way, the last time I checked, the tweet had like 11 million views. Back to the rally, all of us reporters sitting in the press section, we kind of knew what was coming, including this attack on Kemp and Raffensperger.
And they don't want the vote to be honest. In my opinion, they want us to lose. That's actually my opinion. And we can't let that happen, because if we lose Georgia, we lose the whole thing and our country goes to hell.
So remind us the origins of this feud.
So let me give you the short story. In 2018, then President Trump endorsed Kemp in the Republican primary for governor. It clearly helped Kemp win the nomination and eventually the governorship. Then in November and December 2020, here comes the presidential race. Trump had lost Georgia. Trump and his allies were trying to overturn Georgia's results. And to this day, Trump believes Kemp did not do enough. For example, not calling a special session to possibly replace Georgia's electoral college slate of 16 Biden electors with 16 Trump electors. Kemp says he followed the law in signing off on the Biden slate. Then, skip forward to 2022, Trump backs a Republican primary challenger to Kemp, former U.S. Senator David Perdue. But frankly, Kemp destroyed that challenge, getting nearly 74% of the vote. Perdue got 22. Now we skip forward to this year. And, you know, as you mentioned, we thought there was a cooling or a peace between the two sides, maybe an uneasy peace, and maybe a more pragmatic decision that the two sides needed each other. But that all went out the window Saturday.
Okay, so we've gotten to this year. What has Kemp said about Trump this year?
Now, I want to take you back to the Republican National Convention, which was just last month. I know that feels like a lifetime ago. I spoke to Governor Kemp, and here are parts of two questions I asked him. Have you spoken with the former president during your visit or even this year about your guys' disagreements?
Like I've told people, look, I don't need a phone call to support the ticket. I've said I was going to do that all along. It's, you know, it's important for him to win Georgia. It's important in my eyes for us to win Georgia.
Do you expect to appear at a rally with the former president or with the vice presidential choice, J.D. Vance?
I think we'll just see how that goes. I mean, I haven't been asked to do that yet, and I don't know that they've actually planned anything like that. So we'll see as the days go ahead. But I'm in to support the ticket and make sure that we win in 2024.
Again, a reminder that this was from my interview in July with Governor Kemp when he was at the RNC. But Sam, obviously, it seems like it was not enough. Let me reintroduce our audience to a person we've covered in the past, Bill White, who came into the Georgia political spotlight leading the Buckhead cityhood effort. Buckhead, a wealthy business, residential, and shopping section in the city of Atlanta, and a group there wanting to break off from the city, create its own government, its own police force. Now, those efforts were blocked at the state capitol for a number of reasons, which we'll not get into right now. But it was one of the reasons White did not like Kemp. White is also a longtime friend of former President Trump. And he tells me that what relit this fight was a couple of things that happened during Trump's visit to Atlanta in April for a fundraiser in Buckhead. First, the governor not attending, and then this second thing.
The First Lady of Georgia has made this statement that she's not going to vote for Donald Trump because he hasn't earned her vote yet, and that she's going to write Brian Kemp's name in. Okay. Now, if you're Donald Trump, what do you do with those two pieces of information?
White mentioned a number of other things, including Kemp not being a more vocal or more supportive. For example, saying, I support the nominee, instead of saying, I support former President Donald Trump. I know these are semantics, but that was one of the things that was brought up. And of course, Kemp not appearing at Saturday's rally. Kemp's folks told us before the rally that he had prior commitments.
So what are you hearing from across the spectrum of the Georgia Republican Party?
A couple of things here. First, in the hours after Saturday's rally, a large number of Georgia Republicans went on social media to express their support for Kemp. Also, a vast majority of elected Republicans I reached out to did not want to talk about it on the radio. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who is a major backer of Trump, both vocally and financially, was at the Saturday rally. And he was also in Athens for Wednesday's Georgia Chamber event. I asked him about the feud.
I have a good working relationship with the governor. I have a good working relationship with the former president, Mr. Trump, and unfortunately, all my friends don't always see eye to eye, but in the big picture, this election is about Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris.
Now, Sam, here's the reality. The vast majority of Georgia Republicans support both men. A number of folks throughout the number of 90, maybe 95% that support both. But the concern among some Republicans is that in a state that could end up again with a razor-thin margin for president, some of those folks may not vote for Trump and make a difference in November.
Yeah, I mean, this cannot be part of a winning playbook for Georgia. I mean, remember I did a story this summer when we heard from some disaffected Republicans and independents in the suburbs who were on the fence about Trump, but who have a lot of respect for Kemp. And like you said, Trump needs those people. And resurfacing this feud with the governor, a very popular governor, will not help.
You know, Sam, I want to finish up on this through line between my reporting on the Kemp-Trump feud and your reporting on the state election board. And it's this. There is a divide among Republicans and conservatives in Georgia. And that divide could mean many things in November, including another Trump loss and another election where unfounded claims of fraud and stealing votes could happen again.
That's it for this edition of Plugged In, a WABE Politics podcast. You can get more Georgia politics at wabe.org/election2024.
Plugged In is a production of the WABE Politics Desk. Our producer is Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick. If you appreciate the reporting you hear on this podcast, subscribe and leave us a review.
Have a great weekend.